Nobody told you the truth about Buddhism, not really. You've probably heard it described as peaceful, calming, maybe something about breathing and letting go, maybe a quote on a coffee mug. Something that made you feel for a moment like everything was going to be okay. But here's the thing. The people who actually studied what the Buddha taught, who sat with the real ideas, not the Instagram version, a lot of them came out the other side. Unsettled. Not broken. Not hopeless. Just permanently changed in a way that's hard to explain, because Buddhism, at its core, isn't trying to comfort you, it's trying to wake you up. And those are very different things. So today we're going to do something simple. We're going to explain Buddhism the way you'd explain it to a 10-year-old. Short words, clear ideas, no jargon, but we're not going to soften it, because the moment you soften it, you lose the whole point. If you're someone who wants real answers, not just reassuring ones, subscribe. That's exactly what we do here. Now, let's start with the question the Buddha started with. Why do you suffer? Not sometimes, not when things go wrong. Why is there something uncomfortable running underneath almost every moment of your life? You've felt it, even on good days. A kind of low hum, a restlessness, something slightly off. The Buddha noticed that too. And what he found when he looked closely? Most people aren't ready for it. About 2,500 years ago, there was a young man who had everything. Wealth, a palace, a family, a future already planned out for him. His name was Siddhartha, and one day he left. Not because he was ungrateful, not because something terrible happened to him personally. He left because he saw something he couldn't unsee. He saw an old man, a sick man, a dead man. And he realized, for the first time, he really realized that this was coming for everyone, for the people he loved, for himself. No amount of comfort could stop it. So he walked away from the palace, spent years looking for an answer, tried everything. Extreme fasting, meditation with the best teachers of his time, total isolation. None of it worked. Until one night, sitting under a tree, he stopped searching. And something clicked. He spent the rest of his life, about 45 years, walking from village to village, explaining what he found. Those conversations were eventually written down. And what's remarkable is how consistent they are. He wasn't building a religion about gods or miracles. He was pointing at something about the structure of human experience, something you can test for yourself. He called the core of his teaching something that translates roughly as the way things actually are. Not the way we want them to be, not the way we pretend they are, the way they actually are. And here's what's strange. Most people hear his ideas and say, yes, that makes sense, then keep living exactly as if it doesn't. Because understanding these ideas intellectually is one thing. Feeling what they actually mean in your body, in your daily life, is something else entirely. That gap between knowing and feeling is where Buddhism lives. And it's also where things start to get uncomfortable. Okay, here's where it gets real. The Buddha's core teaching can be summarized in 3 ideas, and 3 observations about life that, once you really see them, you can't go back. The first one, nothing lasts. Not your happiness, not your pain, not the version of you that exists right now, not the people you love, not the feeling you have reading this sentence. Everything is moving, everything is changing, always. That sounds obvious, right? But think about how you actually live. You find something good, a relationship, a job, a feeling, and immediately, without even noticing, you start trying to hold on to it, to freeze it, to make it permanent. And the moment it starts to change, something in you resists. That resistance, the Buddha said, that's the engine of suffering. The second observation, that resistance causes pain. Not just the big losses, the small ones too. The meal that ends, the conversation that's over, the weekend that becomes Monday. There's a low-level ache built into wanting things to stay the way they are. He wasn't being pessimistic. He was being precise. The third observation is the strangest one. The you that's doing all this holding on? It's not quite what you think it is. If you find that idea pulling at something in you, Subscribe. Because that third observation is its own entire conversation, and we go deep on it here. But here's the surface of it. The Buddha said there is no fixed, permanent self sitting behind your eyes running the show. What you call you is more like a river than a stone. Always moving. Always changing. Made of experiences, memories, sensations, none of which stay still. So who exactly is suffering? And who is trying to hold on? That question doesn't have a comfortable answer. Let's sit with this for a moment. If nothing lasts, and we know this, we've always known this, why does it still catch us off guard every single time? Someone leaves. Something ends. A version of your life you were building quietly collapses, and it feels like a surprise. Every time. That's not weakness, that's not failure. According to the Buddha, that's just what happens when you live as if permanence is possible. We build our entire lives around the assumption that things will stay. Relationships, identities, plans, the way people see us, the way we see ourselves. And underneath all of it, quietly, constantly, is the fear of loss. Not just of people or things, loss of who you think you are. Because if the self isn't fixed, if you are more like a process than a person, then every time life changes dramatically, part of what you thought was permanent dissolves. And that's genuinely disorienting. Here's what Buddhism doesn't do with that. It doesn't say, don't worry, it'll be fine. It doesn't say, just be grateful. It doesn't hand you a coping mechanism. It says, look at this clearly. Just look. Because the suffering doesn't come from the change itself. It comes from the gap between what's actually happening and what you're insisting should be happening instead. That gap is where anxiety lives, where grief gets stuck, where the low hum of dissatisfaction never quite goes away. And the uncomfortable implication is this: most of the pain in your life isn't being done to you, it's being generated by you. Not because you're broken, because you're doing exactly what an untrained mind does. Reaching for permanence in a world that doesn't offer it. The question Buddhism leaves you with isn't how do I fix this, it's something quieter. What would it mean to stop pretending? So where does that leave you? With a teaching that offers no shortcuts, no promises, no guarantee that things will work out. And somehow, that's the most honest thing anyone has ever said. Because you already knew life wasn't permanent. You already knew that holding on was exhausting. You already knew that the version of yourself you're protecting is always shifting anyway. Buddhism didn't invent these problems, it just refused to look away from them. And here's what's strange about that refusal. When you stop pretending, when you actually let yourself see that nothing is fixed, not even you, something unexpected happens. Not peace, exactly. Not happiness in the way you were sold, happiness, something quieter. A kind of lightness that comes from not carrying the weight of a story that was never true. The Buddha described it once in a way that stayed with people for 2,500 years. He said the problem was never the world changing. The problem was the thirst, the constant reaching, for it to be different than it is. And the moment that thirst loosens even slightly, something opens. You don't need to become a monk for that. You don't need to meditate for hours. You just need to catch yourself. Once, clearly, in the act of reaching, of insisting, of pretending. And stay there for a moment. Just look. That's it. That's the whole teaching, really. Explained like you're 10. Uncomfortable as it actually is. If you want to keep sitting with questions like this, subscribe. These conversations don't end here. There's a lot more to look at carefully together.